Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Look at Transistor. Transistor is a game, just to talk a little bit about it at the top here, that I actually made a video for earlier, but unfortunately there was a screen flicker issue, so I'm re-recording it here. This is the day of launch. I've already beaten Transistor. We've had it for probably a little bit over a week here. I beat it on the PS4 version, but I am playing the PC version. And this is the new game from Supergiant Games, the same crew that brought you Bastion. And the first thing that I'll say right off the top here, even before we get involved in some combat, is that it kind of feels like, even though Transistor is its own game, it sort of feels like Dark Souls 2 to Bastion's Dark Souls 1, which is, like, it's not a direct sequel by any stretch of the imagination, you know. You don't still have Rux telling you exactly what's happening in the world. Instead, you have, you know, this Transistor telling you what's happening in the world. But the games do feel similar enough that it warrants kind of that, you know, noticing that it's a thematic comparison, if that makes sense. We're just gonna get started here. This is probably about 20 minutes of the way into Bastion. Sorry, into Transistor. I will probably make the mistake many times. Maybe half an hour into it, and it's a very short game. The first time I beat it was around 3 hours long, maybe 4 hours. I didn't do much of the optional stuff, but there isn't that much optional stuff to do in the first place. So, you know, it's a shorter game, and it does have a, you know, a very interesting New Game Plus mode that I may or may not ever get mileage out of. But in any case, let's just read this terminal here, and then we'll have some combat, and I'll explain that, because that's the meatiest part of Transistor, apart from the narrative. Basically, this takes place in a post-apocalyptic, or, you know, an apocalyptic world. Apologies for my speech impediment there. But yeah, the world is currently going through an apocalypse, kind of like a nanobot technology thing is taking over the entire city, and there may or may not have been a conspiracy by, you know, the Illuminati of the city to unleash it. So, news brief. At approximately 1:17 a.m. last night, after all scheduled live performances had ended, OVC received several independent reports of suspicious activity at the well-known concert pavilion. Authorities are evaluating reports that at least 2 people were critically injured, potentially including Red, the headlining act. That's us! More news as it develops. So we should have some combat here. That's the way that the game's story is told. Maybe we don't actually have any combat in here. We should have combat when we get out here, though. Yeah, that's one of the 2 ways the game's story is told. One of the ways is, via terminals like that you find in the environment, and the other way is via the narrator. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the actual, like, the visuals of the game, which I think are really, really wonderful looking. It kind of looks to me like if they remade Final Fantasy VII, this is what the pre-rendered environments might look like as a result of, you know, newfound technology and stuff like that. Really good lighting, really kind of interesting, you know, art direction here as well. And the music nails it too. From an audio-visual standpoint, this is a game that's very good. Just in general, I think the game is pretty good. But I do think that maybe if you, I'm gonna hold LB to hum here. If you go into this comparing this exactly with Bastion, I don't necessarily know if it's an unfavorable comparison, but I think most people will end up liking the former game from the company a little bit more than the new one. Which is not to say that Transistor is bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, it really raises a lot of questions, like where does Supergiant go from here? I know that if they're watching, they're going to be probably a little bit pissed off. I'm going to hopefully, I can't skip through the cutscene, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because this is one of the very few kind of cutscenes in the game, but it'll explain what's going on. But yeah, this is also one of the moments in the game that is kind of like artistically scripted with the music as well. It works pretty good, so I'm going to continue talking over top of it because I don't want to get a content ID match. But yeah, it's so similar to Bastion that they do warrant a lot of comparisons. So that's us in the background there is Red. We are a singer in this world, and we have been maybe used as a pawn in a conspiracy from these guys who are the Camerata, which is kind of like the, you know, scientific elite of our community or our city, a ploy using this sword called the Transistor here to potentially unleash some kind of, like, culling mechanism that maybe would cull the population, lower the population, so that it wouldn't, or they could create their kind of utopian society. But the story is very vague, and it's revealed in kind of, you know, hushed tones and through these primary sources and through dialogue with characters as time goes on. We're a silent protagonist, though, which is really interesting because when we find these terminals, we have the opportunity to post comments. They're scripted comments, but that gives our character a voice. So even though she doesn't really talk throughout the whole game, and in fact, you know, it's one of the most thematic parts of the game, or interesting thematic parts of the game, is that our character has no voice despite the fact that she's a singer. Being able to leave these comments still gives us some insight into who, you know, Red is and what Red's mission is here. This is basically a flash forward to the start of the game. So again, I apologize for showing this moment off. It's not a major spoiler necessarily. It's just kind of an unfortunate moment for that to happen. But I didn't expect to be recording my video at this part of the game. In fact, this is why previously I ended it just before it.
She's here.
Alright. So we will get a new function here. Or maybe we'll actually have a boss fight here. We will have a boss fight. Alright, by the way, of course, the obvious thing is I apologize for talking over the narrator, but that is why I turned on subtitles, because otherwise we would both be infuriated. The narration still does a good job, still does a great job. Logan Cunningham, you know, just not only having an amazing voice, but also the writing behind it works really well. Alright, let's talk about the combat of Transistor, because this is where it differs kind of most obviously from Bastion. I think if you knew nothing about Transistor going in, you would probably think it's just another, you know, action RPG, hack and slash type thing. That is not what we have going on here. Instead, we have these functions, but the main way that combat happens in the game is via this mode right here, which is called turn, or turn, you know, open close parentheses. This allows us to pause time and actually plan our attacks accordingly. Our attacks are mapped to the face buttons of the 360 controller. You can also use keyboard and mouse the same way you would in Bastion. So right now I have a couple of attacks I want to show off just before I actually plan an attack here. But basically what I'm getting at is this kind of like pause time mode adds way more strategic depth to the game at the expense of the, you know, taking away a little bit of the frantic and frenetic combat for the most part. So we have this move which is called Crash. As you can see, that does 55 damage right there. It also sets enemies up to be more vulnerable to future attacks that come in the same sequence. We also have Breach, which is a more high damage attack that's a little bit longer range, but it has a little bit narrower of an effective range as well. If I delete that. By the way, that bar at the top, if I just like use this, that represents how many attacks that we can do within our, or how many actions we can do, because moving takes the same, you know, power here. Draw a wonderful figure 8 on the ground. You know, I'm not proud of myself, but I would be disingenuous if I didn't at least try to draw one, right? Now that's just, I was making gear there. In any case, my attack map to the X button is bounce, which is only effective really for the most part when there's multiple enemies around, and then Y is my dodge. You can change these. There are dozens of attacks, dozens of functions which basically get mapped to these attacks, which is really cool because it creates a huge degree of customization in the game that really does make it probably more viable to play through the game multiple times. So after you've planned everything that you want to do on your turn, you basically just walk around and dodge until your turn meter comes back. It is a little weird to get used to. I believe that she maybe has a few lives, like this won't actually kill her. We'll see though. She must have felt that. Oh no, maybe that was actually way easier than I expected there. Oh no, she does come back, okay. And she spawns these enemies. These enemies, there's multiple different kinds of enemies in the game as you might expect. These enemies are kind of like support class enemies. Basically what they do is cause, you know, enemies that stand near them to replenish health, which is really not so good. And I almost died right there, which would not be good either. Don't think I can quite reach what I want to reach here, but we'll see. When you die, and that's something that could quite realistically happen here, because I am not the best player in the world. You can also, by the way, in case it isn't clear, you can also use turn plus, or sorry, turn parentheses to just take out one enemy. You don't necessarily have to. I'm just going to dodge away at the end of this here so I can be a little safer. You don't necessarily have to use it just to do like one spell of combat, if that makes sense. I totally forgot what I was talking about. The reason it takes a little while to get used to is because you can't actually use your attacks outside of the turn mode, outside of the frozen time mode, unless you never use the frozen time mode, unless you never use turn. Please don't kill me. If you die, you don't actually die, you just lose one of your functions for a brief period. But this should be able to finish her off. Maybe not quite get the kill, but it might be close. There might be a third wave. Apologies for the frame rate issues, but that's because of the fact that there's some particle effects on screen right now. This is a cheerleader. Cheerleader is basically a unit that buffs another unit, thereby protecting it from being actually attacked, which in this case is this creep, which could actually do some pretty serious damage to us. Yeah, we died there, so we lost Crash. Kind of an interesting way of handling the death mechanic in the game. It happens occasionally. There's so many functions in the game that it doesn't really matter all that much if you lose one. Oh, I did not mean to do that at all. It really doesn't matter if you lose one, but if you start losing, like, your dodge, for example, then best of luck to you. Is that another cheerleader there? It is. Okay. So I'm just going to hang back here, and we'll try to sneak some through. I would have preferred to, you know, not be fighting a mini-boss at this point of the game, and that would probably make it a little bit easier for me to survive. But on the subject of the game's combat system, I think it's good. I think it's unusual, and I think it's unique, and I think that actually makes it a better game as a result. I'm glad this isn't just like a, you know, a sci-fi version of the combat in Bastion. I think that would have made this a little bit lesser of a game. If we don't pick up these cells, enemies respawn. Okay, don't die twice. That would actually be me being a huge idiot. Unfortunately, I think, like, can I do 3 of those attacks? I can. That's probably our best way to deal damage. Now that we've lost Crash, we don't really have our setup move, unfortunately. We have a lot of other functions we can go to if we find an access point. Shortly, though, okay. Oh, I have lost another function. Luckily, I wasn't using those anyway. Next time we get to an access point, we'll, which should be right after this, we'll be able to upgrade ourselves a little bit and make sure that we actually still have attacks on the go. I apologize for being terrible, but again, I would have loved if we were just fighting some, you know, basic mobs, but instead, unfortunately, we find ourselves fighting one of the more interesting encounters of the game, not necessarily one of the more difficult ones. Overall, yeah, I think Transistor is a good game. I don't necessarily think it's as groundbreaking as Bastion was, and I can't help but feel that people who really were super hyped for the game... Okay, just do one more attack, please. Maybe we have to use turn mode here. I can't help but feel that people who are super hyped for the game are going to be a little bit disappointed. She should be deceased at this point. Thank God. Not disappointed because it's a bad game, but disappointed because it is very similar to its predecessor. We're gonna kill her here, or you know, end her soul basically. Not to say that yeah, it did hit there. Not to say that it's a bad thing that it's super similar to Bastion, but just that it's not necessarily as groundbreaking as Bastion was. You know, Bastion was a breath of fresh air. I don't know how long Supergiant can keep making narrator-driven, you know, pseudo-action RPGs. That being said, maybe they can keep doing it for a long time as long as they continue to be good. So, every time you level up, you get anywhere from 1 to 3 choices or decisions to make. Basically, on this one, you get to choose a function, and then you probably get to choose a limiter afterwards. We don't really have a choice in terms of our function here, though. We'll take help, and I'll explain what these actually do a little bit later. Oh, permission is the other one. This allows us to enter back doors, which is where we encounter all of our optional missions in the game. So, I'm hoping that there is an access terminal around here somewhere. Sometimes I do find navigation a little tricky. Doesn't this look like if they remade Final Fantasy VII, you could see yourself like running across here in Midgar or something like that? It's you know, a comparison that doesn't really need to mean anything beyond the fact that they're kind of superficially similar. Okay, so let's explain what we've got going on here. This is basically our customization mode, and for functions are, alternatively, they could either be attacks, like they're the things that we have mapped to our face buttons, or they can be modifiers to existing attacks. Now, unfortunately, 2 of my functions have been overloaded because I'm an idiot. We lost Bounce, which I don't really like that much, but we lost Crash, which is really good. These will be repaired, but we need to find one more access point in order to do it. So what we're gonna do is put another new move in our A button slot, and we'll put the one that we just got here. Actually, maybe we'll, yeah, we'll put the one that we just got in our X slot. And each one of these functions, again, it doesn't just have to be an attack, it also doubles as a modifier. So if you look, this is called load. So you can see what it'll do if we put it in any of these active slots, or passive slots, sorry, for active attacks. So if we put it in Spark, it'll increase the radius and the damage, and it's basically radius and damage for all these, radius and damage, etc., etc. This one actually does more destination damage, but that's because it's attached to our dodge, which I have no interest in. Cool, so we'll just put it in our, basically standard attack here, and then move on. So, imagine that there's, like, quintuple the amount of functions, or at least triple the amount of functions that I have unlocked right there, and then you can see the incredible degree of customization in the game. I am boring, so I used basically the same functions and attacks the entire time, but I know I was talking to TB, and TB's been using, you know, various different ones. This is the cutscene where they kind of set the stage for the story. It's not really a cutscene, but, you know, a vignette, if you will. This is the Camerata. Again, they're like the scientific elite, the Illuminati of the town. The people that we expect, or suspect, were the people who started what's known as the Process, which was that, basically all the enemies that were fighting and the disease that's basically destroying the city. So once this finishes, we'll do a little bit more exploration within Transistor, and hopefully do some more kind of basic encounters to show off how the actual combat works outside of boss fights. But apart from that, I think I've said my piece on Transistor. It's a convoluted game to cover because it's good, but I think that, you know, the way most people feel about Dark Souls 2 in comparison to Dark Souls 1, I know there's a lot of people that like DS2 more than DS1. I'm one of them, to be honest with you. But I know that most people probably feel that DS2 is a good game that doesn't fully, you know, live up to the legacy of the original. That's kind of how I feel about this, even though Transistor is not necessarily even meant as a sequel at all to Bastion. They do share so many thematic similarities, though, that it's impossible to separate them. So we get introduced to a new enemy here. This enemy is called Snapshot. So let's try doing some of our new attacks here. So we have Spark. The way Spark works is that it basically fires like a big grenade here, which, can we move it? No, that'll take it out of range. Which does extra damage. I'm not sure. Sometimes these block the first attack. Maybe if you use that attack on something else first, I'm not totally sure. We can sneak that one through here and try this out again. There's only maybe 6 or 7 enemy types in the game. More obviously if you include the few bosses in the game in on that as well. They take, they show us our own photo to kind of, you know, it's like in Pulp Fiction, you know? You feel that sting, that's pride fucking with you. That's, I think they're trying to, you know, get inside of our head here, basically. Alright, so we killed 2 of them here. After every time that you have, like, a basic combat encounter, or any kind of combat encounter, you get this kind of, like, you know, recap screen of how you did. There is a leveling system. The leveling system itself is relatively rudimentary, but the, what you get from it is not. Please tell me I don't have to go through the back door. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going through the back door, necessarily, but, I kind of just, we'll show it off. It's just, this is the optional stuff in the game, basically. It's a really inopportune time to do, a video of it, but, a really inopportune time in the game to do a video of it, but whatever. So here we have, you know, the same thing existed in Bastion in the hub world. There were these tests that you can do. So there's a few different kinds of tests. There's speed tests, you know, beat X number of enemies in X number of seconds. There's planning tests, which are like beat X number of enemies in 1 turn. And then there's, this does give me a really good opportunity to show off the combat, though. And by the way, this is not how I want to handle this. Our attacks here are, like, preordained, basically, so I don't really get to choose what I'm bringing in. Like, our functions, that is, are preordained, so I don't have any of my normal attacks here, which is fine, because, well, actually, I have Breach, which is one of my normal attacks. But anyway, we've got 32 seconds to beat these guys, so let's set it up. The bad cells are not particularly annoying. We just want to make sure that when an enemy dies, we actually pick up their cell. And let's go into turn mode here. How do we want to handle this? We can just crash, and what you want to try to do as much as possible is line up multiple enemies in one hit. This one's not going to work. I wonder if I could still sneak a breach through there. Doesn't look like it. All right, let's try this again. Maybe we'll do breach. That's still going to kill you somehow. And then we'll just walk over here, finish you for sure, and finish you. Or maybe we can breach instead and then hit the enemy behind you as well. We do want to make sure that we actually get the cells that they drop at the end, though. This should not be super difficult. I've done this speed test before, but I also fought that boss before and didn't lose 2 of my functions. I think this is the end, maybe. Oh, no, there's some bad cells over there. So I'm going to start just by backstabbing these 2 guys. We'll at least get the backstab on one of them, and then we'll just throw in a couple of breaches, which will take them out pretty easily. I do like the more strategic kind of element to combat here. Not to say that, you know, Bastion didn't have strategy in its combat, because it obviously did. But it's a little bit more, or less, like, thinly veiled here, I guess. Alright, so we have many bad cells, which is a little annoying. If this one fails, we might not actually be able to sneak off any more attacks, but, oh, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think we can do it. Apologies for the frame rate, by the way. It's just getting a little weird with all the particle effects on screen, I guess.
Take us on their own turf.
So that is the process terminated. When you do this, you unlock more music. So there are optional objectives like that that you can get into. For the most part, I didn't do many of these on my first time through the game, but it's nice to have kind of just an area to chill out here. The game is very abstract. Even the way it tells its story is vague and subtle and abstract, as mentioned, but
Was hoping it'd be more
so it's kind of nice to have like an area where you can just chill out, if that makes sense. There's another access point here. This may actually allow us to get our functions available. Yes, our functions are back, so let's equip those. No, not like that. We'll do one of these instead. It's like unequip everything and then go back to our like default loadout, like that. And in our B slot, we're gonna put this, and in our X slot, we're gonna put Spark, and in our Y slot, we are gonna put Jaunt, which is our dodge. Again, we can put some of these extra ones in our active slots. We can also unlock passive slots, which are just on the left side of the screen there. Those help out a great deal as well. We also have limiters. So limiters work kind of the same way that they did in Bastion. I don't know if they were called limiters in Bastion, but in Bastion you had the option to... I mean, maybe they were called like runes or something like that. Druidic something, I can't remember. But basically you would like pray to a statue or a god, and that would make the game harder, but also give you more rewards. There's limiters like that in Transistor as well, which really just adds to that high degree of customization when it comes to actually playing the game, you know, the way you want to play the game. If you want to make it super difficult, you can, and you'll get rewarded for that as a result. I didn't use any limiters on my way through the game, but, you know, this one says, this process will spawn shielded cells when terminated. That seems annoying as heck. I just played it through the, you know, vanilla way. Alright, so this will probably be the last encounter we actually do over the course of this video. Just because at this point, again, I think I've kind of said my, my piece. I am not necessarily the best Transistor player in the world, and I think I've shown off some pretty piss-poor gameplay on my part so far. But do keep in mind, I have beaten the game, and, I only got overloaded. I only lost functions a couple of times in the entirety of the game. So, you know, you may want to use those limiters, especially if you find yourself, you know, really taking a shine to the combat. Overall, I think the game's good. 20 bucks for 3 hours, 4 hours. I've heard some people, because reviews are actually up now, so this is one of the benefits of having to re-record, is that I can see that I'm not crazy, and a lot of people seem to have the same opinion on the game as I do. But I've seen some people saying 6 hours. It's one of those things where, you know yourself better than I know. You're one of those people that likes to do all of the optional side quests in the game. I am very much not. If you're like me, maybe you're looking at 3 to 4 hours. If you're more of a completionist, if you run Nick strats, you know, maybe 6 hours. And that's gonna bother some people. I mention this in every video. I appreciate short games, and I think the game tells its story in a logical manner. It doesn't end super abruptly, necessarily, that you would, like, you think that they, you know, ripped you off from, like, 10% of the game, or, you know, 50% of the game, or something like that. The story ends logically, in my perspective, at least. But yeah, it is, you know, it's 20 bucks. That's not going to be okay for everybody. But I think I'm confident in saying that if you like Bastion, you should come into this with, like, cautious optimism. You should like Transistor if you like Bastion. But just keep in mind that, you know, whereas Bastion was kind of like a landmark original title that had this really cool gimmick of the narrator constantly kind of like dynamically describing how things go down. That's all here in Transistor as well, but it's not novel anymore. It's not necessarily the freshest. Mind you, Supergiant are still the only people making games like this out there. I just wonder what they're going to do next, or if they're just going to be, you know, the studio that makes Logan Cunningham games, or Logan Cunningham narrated games forever, the same way, you know, Telltale is the company that does those point-and-click adventure games with that style. Anyway, you get what I'm saying, hopefully. Transistor is available on PS4 and PC. I played through the PS4 version fully myself. Totally fine. I've played the PC version for probably about an hour now. Haven't noticed any issues beyond slowdown when using fraps, but that's on my computer's end, not the game's actual issues. So, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you enjoyed looking at the game, consider picking it up. It's available, again, at the link in the video description below to pick it up on Steam, and I would vouch for the PS4 version as well. Not saying one's more significant, one's better. They play basically the same to me. Additionally, if you enjoyed the video, click the like button. It helps out a great deal, and of course, subscribe if you want to see more in the future. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.